Welcome to the Principal's Perspective. I'm Dr. Adrian Camm.
And I'm Teagan Collins. Let's get into today's episode.
Teagan, we're back for another episode.
Hello, Adrian.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, really good, thanks.
Excellent.
Got some big news in your world. You've recently had to present your research to a panel of academics for your colloquium, your confirmation colloquium as part of your PhD. Talk to us about it.
I am now a candidate.
Congratulations.
Officially. It was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. Facing a panel of academics is not something I'd like to do every single day, as I'm sure many people within our audience will agree, and as I'm sure you will agree. The academic debate and rigorous debate is not something that I was embracing, but I'm learning to embrace that as a researcher and now as a PhD candidate. I presented my research that I've been working on over the past 18 months. It's probably a little bit more elongated as I took a period of leave when I had my little baby. So 18 months of work all came down to this one meeting with a panel of 6 or 7 academics from my university, but also from other universities as they were independent panel members. And I had to present on my research, about a 15-20 minute presentation. And then each panel member had about 10 minutes of dialogue with me or conversation or questions or tensions within the research, as they like to position it. But at the end of the day, I got the big tick of approval and now the work begins.
It's a significant milestone. So congratulations and well done.
Thank you.
But you're 100% right. Academic feedback is a whole new level of directness.
Unlike anything I've ever experienced before.
And we might pick that up in another episode.
Tell me, Adrian, what are you reading at the moment?
I've always got a couple of books on the go and usually an audio book as well, but I'm going through a stack of books related to Carl Jung. The one I'm reading at the moment is Modern Man in Search of a Soul. So I don't know if I'm having some sort of existential crisis or something, Teagan, but it's something that's really piqued my interest lately. And so I'm really getting into the details of what we would call his au revoir.
So will a convertible pull up next week? Or
Yeah, I don't know if it's a midlife crisis.
Tell me more about the search of a soul.
For those that don't know, Carl Jung is a very famous psychologist, a psychiatrist, and he's written extensively about human psychology and dreams. And listen, he's got some really fascinating ideas. I can't say that I agree with everything that he's written, and remember that we have to put things in context in terms of his geography and also where he existed, what was going on in the world at the time, where he came from, his positionality. So looking at it from that perspective is really interesting because I'm a sociologist and I've had a little interest in psychology, particularly through my PhD and the work of Michael Polanyi and his idea of tacit knowledge and intuition. But I think that's a nice segue into our episode today.
It is indeed. I'm very much looking forward to talking about the notion of tradition versus innovation and how we in schools, when we inherit often a very long history and tradition and heritage. For us, it's almost 160 years of practices and ways of being and decisions, rites of passage, the list goes on. And how do we innovate within that framework? So today we're going to be talking about how we have innovated off the back of a very long tradition with the introduction of a program that we have called Echoes and Dialogues, which is the introduction of philosophy. Adrian, the tradition was that we had a chaplain and that we were a school of faith and of practicing religion. However, we were technically non-denominational, which was a very interesting reflection for me, particularly when I was applying for the position, actually reading through the website, thinking that this is a school that has grounded tradition of faith and spirituality. But in fact, it was a little bit more abstract when I arrived, perhaps, and you gave me that context in the interview, I think. So, Adrian, I'm really interested to hear from you around principalship, what it means to inherit tradition, but then how we innovate within the systems and structures that are part of the school fabric.
The worst thing a principal can do, a new principal can do coming into a school, is to ignore the past. We have to honour what's come before us. We have to celebrate it. We have to acknowledge it. And we have to then take people on a journey to the current day. So we look to the past so that we can make sure that what we're doing today still serves us as a school. Then we need to look to the future. And we need to be asking questions about our history and tradition to make sure that what we're doing today is still going to serve us in 5, 10, 15 or 20 years in the future. And a classic example of that here at Westbourne is what you've already touched on. We did have a chaplain. We were non-denominational. In many ways, though, I would have described Westbourne as having Christian values. But there was this focus on Christianity. We had a Christian chaplain who delivered chapel services to all students at the school. So when that chaplain resigned and took up a position in another school, you and I both had an initial conversation and we said, let's just pause for a minute. Let's not rush into recruitment. Let's not rush into replacing the chaplain. Because what I've noticed at the school is that the school today is very different than what it was 30 or 40 years ago. Our demographics have changed significantly. The location of our major campus in Hoppers Crossing, west of Melbourne in Victoria, Australia, is still, I think, the third fastest growing area in Australia. So what used to be a very Caucasian and Anglo-Saxon student demographic has now evolved into perhaps what is one of the most multicultural schools in the country. We have over 70 different nationalities and 35 different faith backgrounds at our school, and over 40% of families speak English as their second language in their home. So our context has shifted significantly. So we needed to pause. We needed to look at things critically, and we needed to make a decision. Is focusing on Christianity as a singular religion still going to serve us moving forward based on the way the school has changed? Where we landed with that was probably not. But we needed to make sure that if we were looking at changing something, so change management 101 is making sure we're engaging all those that are involved in the school to get their opinions, to make sure their voices are heard in order for us to have that data and to make a decision in the best interest of the school. We spoke with our executive team. We spoke with our staff. We surveyed our staff. Do you like chapel? Is chapel a good use of our time moving forward? Is a focus on a singular religion still important as part of our identity as a school? Is it inclusive? Does it align with our mission, vision, and values? Does it align with our strategic priorities? So we engaged our staff. We asked our students, what do you like about chapel? Is chapel essential to your well-being? And that's a really interesting point to pick up on that we might touch on later in the episode. That idea traditionally that a program of chaplaincy was inherently connected to well-being. And should it be moving forward? So these are the types of questions we asked. We asked our families. We surveyed them, we ran focus groups, and we pulled all that information into a paper in which we could discuss and debate the results of and look at what we might do next.
Just want to go back to that decision point. I remember it really clearly sitting in your office and reflecting, talking, discussing, debating what next and what the possibilities could be. And as a principal, that notion of risk versus reward or fear of failure or fear of community uproar or media turning up on the doorstep to say, what are you doing? I think that's a really important tension to highlight as a principal. When we're changing tradition, even if it's coming from the executive team or if it's coming from me, those big moments of tradition changes still fall on the principal's shoulder. You know, that weight still sits, balancing that change and innovation with what has been. And I think you glossed over it, but how do you manage that, you know, as a principal with that weight of responsibility? We can talk about distributed leadership, we can talk about shared decisions, shared values. But in that moment, how did you feel when you're balancing the decision, innovation versus tradition?
It's context specific, and it's based on your ability, I think, to read the room and to trust your intuition and your instincts a little bit. So I very quickly ascertained that the culture here at Westbourne was not particularly religious. And let's be honest, religion is one of the most sensitive issues potentially politically that you could look at as a leader, because people have vested interests in their beliefs. Their beliefs are part of their identity. They're part of who they are. And to challenge those is inherently risky. But I fundamentally believe in this idea of leadership as a pedagogy of listening, where we needed to get the voice of our community. Now, if the voice of our community had have said to me or said to us that no, they're happy with chapel and chaplaincy the way that it currently is, okay, that's fine. That's what people are saying. I don't have a particular view in terms of one way or another, but what I want to make sure is that we're still serving the needs of our school and our stakeholders as a result. So the findings of that survey were going to be really interesting. I anticipated the results in many ways based on the conversations I was having with students, with staff, with parents, looking with a critical eye in my first 6 months at the school about how things were working and the systems and the structures and the assemblies and people's feedback anecdotally. So I was anticipating the results to come back as they did. And the results came back and they were not surprising. So I think it was something like, if we combined all the feedback that we had, 75% of our staff either did not have a religious belief or they were not practicing. 75%. And I think it was something like 25% consider themselves atheists. So from our staff demographic, it was very clear what they were saying in terms of they weren't overly concerned about whether we continued with chapel and chaplaincy through the lens of Christianity. What they were concerned about is that we were inclusive, is that we were understanding of our diversity and embracing that and looking for ways to engage each other in understanding different perspectives and understanding where people had come from in terms of their backgrounds, their beliefs and their culture.
The deep thinking, the deep understanding, opportunity for reflection, opportunity for connectedness.
Right.
Still a sense of the spirituality came through from a connection to well-being or a value, if you like, from some of our families around their children having space to reflect and an understanding and an appreciation for the many world religions and views and ways of thinking and ways of being. But it was an interesting moment in time because from that feedback, we could have potentially gone the conservative road and pared back chapel, offered it in a watered down version, if you like, re-engaged a local chaplain who works within the community who might come in a couple of days a week. We could have left the program altogether and we could have just let it go by the wayside and made the move to say this isn't happening. But it was a prime opportunity to innovate, to listen to the community, to listen to what people needed, to what people want, and to then be able to overlay within the systems thinking that we've talked about, coming back to our purpose, what opportunity is here and how can we leverage this?
That's right. And one of our values is community. So one of the really eye-opening things for me was the data that we received as part of this consultation and change management from our parents. Now, we had the broad spectrum of parents and their beliefs, and probably 10% of our parent cohort were still practicing Christians and believed that we should continue with a program of chapel and chaplaincy. But over 90% of our community said that no, that's no longer serving us. So it's not about getting consensus, whole school consensus. You're never going to get 100% buy-in, but it's about managing your stakeholder groups and it's about communicating and it's about being really transparent. This is what you had to say. And as a school, we need to make the best decision in the interests of everybody. And so what we're going to do is we're going to not move forward with chapel and chaplaincy through the lens of Christianity. We're going to decouple religion from well-being because we have a fantastic well-being program that's both proactive and reactive, a great pastoral program, a great team of counsellors and psychologists and nurses, and that's operating independently and going really, really well. So what we're going to do, which is aligned with our vision, which is aligned with our mission and our strategic priorities, is we're going to propose to our community that instead of chapel and chaplaincy, we're going to introduce this program of philosophy, which we're calling Echoes and Dialogues. And it's going to look through a philosophical lens and through the religions of the world and provide a platform for our young people to engage in rigorous debate, in Socratic forums, in Platonic dialogues, to think about things related to their identity so that they can discover who they are, so that they can talk about what is truth, what is beauty, who am I, What is the meaning of life? But then also to engage in contemporary discussions as a large cohort where they're developing the skills, the tools, the attitudes, the attributes, the dispositions to be able to debate, to engage in dialogue, to see things from different perspectives, to understand difference. And in doing that, we connected that back to our vision, shaping learners who inspire the world and shaping the next generation of leaders. Because if we have a group of young people who are leaving Westbourne and going into leadership positions in their respective industries, who understand difference, who understand perspective and can engage and debate and see difference and actually be okay with being in that space, ultimately, we're going to make the world a better place. So making sure that our parents, our staff and our students understood the rationale, understood that it wasn't a decision made in isolation, understood that we've got all layers of the organisation, board sign-off, executive approval, staff engagement, students are aligned, majority of families are on board, and bringing people along on that journey, communicating well, communicating often, not just the rationale, the decision, how the decision was reached, but also then what we're doing, why we're doing it, what's the timeline, and how's it going to impact your children. And that's a really important piece of that significant change management process that we went through.
And we were thinking fast, but we were moving slowly. We were being mindful of a significant change to the tradition of the school. We were being mindful of bringing the stakeholders, our people along. We were mindful of the conversations that needed to happen. And that has resulted in a really deliberately phased rollout of the program. But I just want to circle back to some of those really critical discussions and decisions, because it wasn't all happy days, everyone around the table going, yeah, we're 100% on board. There were conversations about, okay, well, let's say we're talking about the cost of a decision or the benefit of decision. Let's say those 20% of families who signed up for a non-denominational Christian values education, they turn around and say, well, this is no longer the school for me. What if we lost those 20% of enrolments or those 20% of families? We debated that. And we thought, we almost demonstrated ethos and philosophy behind the program in looking at all of these different views, taking into account our community, but then bringing it back to what we felt was best for the students in our care and how we can deliver on our vision and how we can deliver on our purpose. So we kept coming back to, this is the best way for the school moving forward. This is the best institution, if you like, of building new traditions so that when the next principal steps in, or the third principal after you, or the fourth maybe even in time, so that it is a long-standing, sustained tradition that has been reimagined and innovated.
Whether you're an atheist or whether you believe in Buddhism or you're a Sikh or whatever religion that you subscribe to, or none, no one can argue with Christian values. So part of the work that we did with those who you were explaining as part of that 10% or that 20% who believe in Christianity and that's part of their identity, it was making sure that they understood that we're not attacking you. We're not attacking your beliefs. We're not trying to fundamentally change the nature of who we are as a school. But what we are doing is we're adapting to our changing circumstances. Christian values are still important. Fundamentally, they still are part of our DNA as a school. But we're just not platforming Christianity as a religion. We're now stepping back from that and approaching these conversations through philosophy, which I think, in an ironic way, is actually really contemporary. Even though philosophy has been around for thousands of years, I think it's actually really contemporary. It's really inclusive, and it's going to equip our young people to embrace any possible future because they're going to become great thinkers. They're going to be able to think about things in a different way than young people who don't study philosophy. And so I'm really interested, Teagan, in the evolution of the program, and perhaps you can touch on how it started, because it is a phased rollout. And as of next year, it's going to be pretty much across the entire school. But for our listeners, they might be wondering, well, what does a program of philosophy look like? What is Echoes and Dialogue? And I guess for me, it looks at all the different branches of philosophy, and it looks at them in an appropriate way related to real world events that are happening right now. So the branches of philosophy include things like ontology, epistemology, existentialism, ethics. They're the sorts of branches of philosophy that we're talking about. And then underneath those, we're asking provocative questions. What makes me me? I mentioned before, what is truth? And is truth an objective or a subjective phenomena? Really meaty questions that young people can have fantastic debates about, guided by their teachers. So Teagan, why don't you talk about the way the program was initially introduced, the structures of the program, and the staffing involved?
We had some big ideas. We had some bold plans and thinking and how we could best deliver this program, how we can engage young people of all different ages, because this is a program that we've introduced from prep to year 12. So it's evident through the journey and the life of every student, not just for our senior school students or not just for our junior school students. We had this hope and dream that we could envisage a whole year level of 250 students in Socratic debate and discussion led by an expert facilitator. Coming back to our leadership principles of being master communicators, that person needs to be a master communicator to be able to manage and engage each and every student in the room. And as part of our thinking around this program, one of the critical skills, in addition to the fundamental belief of developing young people of sound character, is equipping them, as you've said, with the skills and tools to be able to critically debate or to be able to put a stake in the ground and to say, this is what I believe right now, to be able to articulate that, to be able to hear or see a different point of view, and then perhaps connecting in with metacognition and thinking routines is, well, how do I think differently now that I've heard that? And the dream was to be able to have young people of all ages stand up with a microphone in front of 250 students and say, this is how I feel, or this is how I think. And for everyone else in the room, for there not to be uproar if it's controversial, or for there not to be huge backlash, but for there to be an opportunity for reflection, to be thought, and for the expert facilitator or master communicator to then leverage that in a Socratic way. But we also acknowledge that there's skill building that needs to happen within this program. There's confidence building as well. So how do we build that in smaller groups? Is it in home groups or tutor groups, mentor groups? There's lots of different languages around that. Is it in core classes? That we need people on board that are expertly going to be able to facilitate this so it's a success. So we started small. We identified a working group of people who were interested. We started off with some professional learning, with sharing the journey, with getting them on board as really early adopters of the program. And then we started to phase this with specific year levels. So we started in the secondary school with our senior students. We started off by splitting year levels, trialling it in different forums with our senior students. We trialled it with whole year levels, and then we also looked at doing it in smaller class groups. So we had 3 different trial groups happening at the same time. They were once a fortnight initially for these specific groups within the year level, and then we stopped, reviewed, how's it going, what's working, what's not working. And we found, particularly with the younger students, that the smaller groups were more beneficial. We found with the older students that had more confidence, they were feeling their sense of self within the year level, that they were able to stand up, hold their own in a room. But we identified very early on that our hope and dream, whilst we hope to get there one day, we're not there just yet. So we need to be able to build the skills of our students within those forums to be able to speak critically about how they feel, how they think, what they're reflecting on in a respectful and dialogic way.
I remember, Teagan, when we were communicating with our families and we'd just implemented the program and not everyone was on board. It was starting to be a success. We could see how the program was evolving based on what you've just said. And the feedback was really positive. There were some things we had to adjust as we went along, but the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, to the point where we started getting emails from parents saying, when is this happening with my child's year level? So all of a sudden we had some people who were resistant to the change. Then when they started hearing about the program, understanding what it was about and why we were doing it and how their child would benefit, all of a sudden they were like, implement it faster. So that was a good position for us to be in.
Speed up the integration plan,
Right.
Which we did. We took the feedback on and we thought, okay, well, the most recent semester that's just passed, we hadn't planned to roll this out to every single year level. But we thought the appetite's there. We've done some professional learning with staff. We have our early adopters on board. The groundswell is building. We feel as though we can meaningfully fast track this. So now we're in a position where we identified some time within the timetable that we could hijack, for lack of a better term, to focus on this program. And we appointed, was a really critical point in time, we appointed a head of philosophy or head of echoes and dialogues who was working on developing the lessons, developing the scope and sequence that sits behind the program, building the capacity of staff. He started with optional sessions for staff, so really trying to identify who's interested in this space. We identified some meaningful external professional learning opportunities for that working party, so we've been able to send them to different schools to see different ways of operating, to model Socratic discussion, best practice, what does it look like? So we're now in a position where we have prep to year 12 students engaging in echoes and dialogues before our full rollout occurs next year.
I walked into a class yesterday, I think it was a year 5 class, and of course every time we look at how this is running in different parts of the school, it's a little bit different based on the age and stage of the children. But it was a year 5 class and they were talking about the ethics related to animal testing. And some of the conversations were fascinating. They were really fascinating. But then I also walked into a year 11 class where they were discussing the sociology of gender and how women in particular were treated in different parts of the world and through different religious beliefs. So we're not shying away from the big issue. We're actually providing a mechanism and a platform for children to talk about things that really, really matter.
So just going back to our implementation strategy and what next year looks like, as part of our strategic work, there was a deliverable around reimagining scope and sequence of the day, or what does the structure of the day look like? And we could talk about that in itself for an hour, but I won't bore our listeners with the detail perhaps, or maybe that's a conversation for another time. But as part of that, we identified we need a time at least once a fortnight for the consistency of these conversations to happen. That was something that came out of this early adoption or early introduction of the pilot programs that we've been initiating now over the past 12 months. So next year, every student will have echoes and dialogues once a fortnight. And that will be led in small group class discussions by somebody that teaches them in another area of school life. So we identified what's really critical to this is, yes, to be an expert master communicator, but also that relationship is really critical. We know the evidence and the literature behind relationships and connections from a teaching perspective, trust, building that with our students, psychological safety, and as you've just highlighted, the nature of these conversations, they're big, deep, potentially controversial conversation. So we identified that where possible, we'd love to have somebody leading that discussion that knows these young people in a different context. So that's where we're at for next year.
Sounds really exciting. I was just visualising how this looks because I think of things visually, and for our listeners, they might be thinking, well, what does this look like in practice? Like, you've done a great job explaining it and how we got to where we are and the implementation and how it works structurally. In an environment, so if we've got, let's say, 50 children and 2 adults engaged in this Echoes and Dialogues program, the way I'm visualising it is it's not the traditional pedagogy or teaching and learning approach, if you like, where everything is driven through the teacher as conduit. So you can imagine a teacher says something, might ask a question, one student responds, the teacher responds, asks another question, a different student answers, back to the teacher, almost like a game of ping pong. That's not what we're about here. So what it is it's about students discussing with each other, building on each other's ideas, challenging different perspectives. That's an interesting perspective, Teagan. I hadn't thought of that, but this is what I believe. Equipping them with this understanding that their ideas matter and that they can debate amongst themselves. And the 2 teachers at the front, alongside the 50 children, they can guide the conversation and insert their wisdom and their experience as required. But they're really there just as another participant, which I think is a really exciting approach.
A great prompt that I heard recently from one of our teachers was a student shared their perspective, and this was on the back of a provocation at the beginning of the lesson, and a student was eager to share their perspective and to share their thoughts. And the teacher's question in return was, what's an opposing view? Or what's an alternative way of viewing this? And another student came up with an opposing view and he's asked the same question again. And it was 5, 6, 7 students in, and all of a sudden they had 7 different views or 7 different ways of viewing this provocation, which then really stimulated the deeper discussion rather than just taking, as you, I think, highlighted beautifully what can happen in some classrooms, the ping pong of, okay, teacher now, how do I reframe this? Who do I go to next? Who's going to give me the answer that I want? Or we're standing at the classroom nodding and smiling to try and elicit the response that we want from our students, but really putting them in the hot seat. And sometimes that distance from our views can help elicit discussion and conversation. So it's not necessarily asking a student to own it in that moment, but it's to think of another way of viewing it.
That's part of the program, equipping them with some tools so that they can engage in this way, because it doesn't come naturally to some. And I love that idea of who's got a different perspective, who sees it differently, who's got a different view, an alternative view, looking at things holistically, almost like from that 360-degree perspective, so that you can try and gain a real sense and understanding of whatever the issue or topic is that you're talking about. And there's some other great questions that we're instilling in our young people as part of their toolkit in order for them to be able to engage in debate and dialogue in this manner. And another one is, instead of automatically getting defensive and perhaps emotional, if someone says something that you disagree with or something that causes you to really be challenged, rather than going back to that person and getting into an argument, it's seeking to understand. So if you've been saying something, Teagan, and I just think it's wrong, or I have different views completely.
Happens every day, doesn't it? That's rubbish.
But instead of reacting and becoming emotional, I adopt a stance of curiosity. That's a really interesting perspective, Teagan. I really hadn't thought of that, and I'm actually really challenged by it. Can you tell me more? I want to understand where you're coming from. So we talk about creative and curious learners all the time as part of what we do in schools, but this is really living that, and this is really making sure that our young people adopt a stance of curiosity in order to understand things from different perspectives.
And it's a lever for us, and this is something that we identified as part of the development process, was that our pastoral leaders were having really deep and meaningful conversations with students that had a disagreement behind closed doors. So in a really diverse landscape, as you've already identified, 2 students that may have opposing religious beliefs or views, 2 students that may come at a values proposition from completely different ends of the spectrum, talking about sexuality, talking about identity, talking about toxic masculinity, talking about feminism. So many different big discussions, big picture ideas that can elicit that emotional response that our pastoral leaders were then mopping up. So a teacher reportedly says, Dr. Camm, I had 2 students in my class today. There's a bit of an argument. Can you please follow up for me? The pastoral leader, yeah, of course, goes in to follow up. They have this really meaningful, robust conversation behind closed doors that the rest of the class or the rest of the cohort don't benefit from. So we thought, how can we lift the lid on this? How can we expose students when we think about developing young people of sound character that have the agency to express their ideas and views and do something about it when we talk about shaping young people or leaders to go on and inspire the world? How can we do that in the right forum? And how can we innovate our practice so that we're contemporary, that we're meeting the needs of our community, and that we're instilling a new rite of passage, a new tradition? So I think that when we talk about meaning, we didn't remove the meaning from our existing program. We expanded on it. But there was also a lot of decoupling or repurposing from a structural perspective. If we just go back to, with your principal hat on, things that we had to do, spaces, places, the way that the school operates, the chapel is central to our school. Talk to me about your thinking. Tell our listeners about how we repurposed it sensitively, how we decommissioned it without destroying the heritage and the tradition.
I think that's an interesting piece to pick up on. So it was part of our history. It was part of our identity, particularly over the last 30 years or so here at the school. And so it's not about forgetting that moment in time, because we are stewards. We're only here for a short time. Our role is to make sure that the school continues long into the future after we're gone. So it was about respecting that moment in time and making sure that that's captured in our archives so that we can celebrate that part of our history. But then also making sure that we're making the best use of the facilities that we have in terms of the physical buildings. And so we did need to repurpose the chapel. And it's still in a process of being fully repurposed. There's going to be some refurbishment so that next year it's going to be a dedicated space, a teaching and learning space for both students and adults, focused on philosophical thought, but also focused on leadership development. And so that required some financial investment, that required making sure that we were acting appropriately and sensitively to the history of the building and its religious significance in the past. So that was all considered really, really carefully. Part of the repurposing of the chapel and making sure that we were capturing that moment in time, particularly through our archives and in order for future generations to be able to celebrate that part of our history, it was really important to understand how the chapel was used. It was used for chapel services, but it was used in a variety of other ways here at the school as well. It was used to celebrate weddings, marriage. It was used to celebrate deaths in our community. And it was a place where people could come and mourn and celebrate life of those who were no longer with us. And it was used for a variety of other purposes and reasons as well. So it was about making sure that we engaged with our alumni and our community and understood what was happening in those spaces over a long period of time, and making sure that they understood that we were being respectful of those moments, those significant moments often in their lives, and that we were making sure that we were being true to who we are as a school and bringing those people along on that journey as well, so that they understood that even though the chapel is being repurposed, it's not going to be called the chapel anymore. It's still going to be part of our identity as a school. It's just looking at things from a slightly different perspective, a perspective that is much more inclusive, embracing our diversity and being really respectful to who we are and our demographics today. Teagan, we've talked about the implementation of the program. We've talked about the change management. We've talked about the stakeholder engagement. We've talked about even right through to where we are today and what our plans are for the future in terms of next year and beyond. But an important and integral part of this is making sure that we're going through a continual process of evaluation and looking for the impact that this is having across the school. Talk to us a little bit about what we've done in that space.
Measuring the impact on student learning and how we iterate based on that feedback was really central and important as part of our rollout process. We had different points along that process where we gathered different sets of data. One of those early data sets was a really critical turning point. We were trialling the program with Year 7 and 8 students. 70% of those students reported that they strongly felt that the program was beneficial for them and that they were enjoying the discussion that was coming from it.
That's pretty good.
70%. And that's not to suggest that the 30% were in vehement opposition. They were just not at that strongly agree end of the spectrum. This next part is what fascinated me. 85% of our Year 7 and 8 students could identify that they felt as though their reflection, the way that they could question for understanding and the way that they could debate had improved.
Amazing.
85%. So when we think about developing young people that can reflect on their own learning, that measure of self-assessment, the moment in time where they can identify what skills or what transferable skills am I building here through this dialogic way of conversing or through this Socratic conversation. So we had those quantitative elements, but we also had the qualitative perspective where we had interviews with different students led from our working group. We had conversations with parents within that first pilot group of students as well. And of course, the staff leading the conversations. So measuring that impact early on and reporting back to the community on that impact was part of really building those early adopters too, sharing the good news, sharing the wins, sharing the messages so that we can continue to build that groundswell, knowing that, okay, this program is sitting with Year 7s and 8s at the moment, and then the next phase is going to Year 9s and 10s. And how exciting is it that this is rolling out to your child's year level, or as a student, this is coming to you shortly. And I think that's where you mentioned earlier that we had parents contacting us saying, but why can't you do it for my level now?
That was really reaffirming for us. We'd gone down this path, we'd listened to our community, we instituted something new that we really believed in, but we weren't quite sure how it was going to land. But we were open to making sure that we were adaptable and flexible and fluid enough to be able to change the program based on the feedback that we were getting. Those parents coming back to us and saying, when is my child going to get access to this? It was part of a targeted strategic communications plan around making sure that we were celebrating and promoting the fantastic work that was happening. And that's really key and central to any change management process, because if people don't know what you're doing, they don't know what you're doing. So you have to tell them, you have to inform them, you have to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, and celebrate the successes. Celebrate them early, celebrate them often, and make a lot of noise about the program that you've just introduced.
And from this, we have seen our head of philosophy and members of our working party, we've seen them present at various conferences around Australia and Victoria. They're speaking now as experts in this area of philosophical thought in schools. How do we build young people of sound character? How do we build young people that are the next generation of leaders? So those early wins are not just happening within this program, it's expanding to our leaders, to our broader community. So it's really exciting to see where to next, to plan for next year. I know there's a lot of work going in behind the scenes, but it doesn't stop there. We'll keep iterating, we'll keep reviewing. We have different data points and checkpoints, if you like, throughout the program to make sure that we're taking on that feedback, that we're really living and breathing what we believe about change management and good change management to ensure that it's a sustainable program that has benefits not only for students but for our broader community.
And that's probably a nice way to end the episode, Teagan.
I think so.
Thanks for the conversation.
Pleasure.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Principal's Perspective.
You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Dr. Adrian Camm and Teagan Collins and let us know your thoughts, questions or leadership wins.
Make sure to follow The Principal's Perspective on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your network.
You can be sure to find any references, books or resources we discussed today in the show notes. Please jump on into the comments and join the conversation.